I'd love to start by just
Yeah,
hearing a
sure.
little bit about your background. Like, obviously, you were center snare at the Devils. Like, how did your journey with drum corps begin? Like, what was the first thing that inspired you to go in that direction?
Yeah, it's a funny story. Uh, it was having a crush on a girl in the fifth grade, and um, that led me to, well, I heard that she was wanting to do percussion in fifth grade band class, and so then I decided that maybe I should try out percussion. And when I did that, I thought, maybe I should look up some percussion things online to get kind of a head start, or to, to impress this girl, or just to make sure that I could make it onto percussion. And so I started looking up snare drum, drum line, and that led me to finding the Blue Devils and finding drum corps and drum line. And I just thought it was like the coolest thing I had ever seen. And so I was instantly hooked. And yeah, maybe that's a little different than some people who I feel like a lot of people, it's like drum set first, and then when you get to like high school marching, then people get really into the rudimental side. But yeah, I feel lucky that I found it right away and like really latched onto it. Um, yeah, did that. Started taking lessons after a couple months, and then joined my first indoor drum line when I was in middle school. Did that for a couple years, and then high school marching band, and then my first year of drum corps was with the academy, which is based in Phoenix, and did 1 year there, and then got to make it to Blue Devils the year after that.
Interesting. Is there a is there a pretty strong marching band percussion tradition where you're from? Because where I grew up, it was okay, but the bar wasn't super high. It was just something we did for a couple months during football season and then put all the marching equipment away.
Right. Where did you grow up again?
Montana. And by
Okay,
the way,
cool.
I don't mean to slag Montana at all. They had an excellent music program. It's just that marching
Mhm.
band was only a small fraction of it.
Right. I could say the same for Arizona. I think in general, like arts programs here are a little underfunded. We might be like 48th out of 50 as far as education funding goes. So yeah, so arts funding and arts programs, music, marching band, as a result, are all not as big as some other places. Some of the hot spots are just like Texas and Southern California and parts of the Midwest and like the DC area, um, where yeah, where just like marching band has become a really big kind of niche and culture for the people who are involved in it. So yeah, so it's growing for sure, and there's lots of people, doing awesome work, band directors, percussion instructors, and who are trying to, foster more people and get more people kind of excited about percussion and the marching scene. So yeah, there are a lot of drummers here today that go on to march drum corps and march indoor groups and stuff like that. But it's definitely not like a hot spot per se.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk more about your biography eventually, but one tangent that occurs to me, and I've been fascinated with drum corps kind of on the periphery of my interests ever since I was in marching band. And I've always kind of admired it from afar. Then in like 2018, 2019, when flow marching became a thing, I started seeing all these YouTube clips and it kind of rekindled an interest. But a question that I've always had is what's the biggest difference in terms of the level, in terms of the intensity, in terms of the practice that's required and everything else for somebody who's maybe played in a semi-high level high school or college marching band? What's the difference between that and the level required for a drum corps?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say it's just like another order of magnitude of like the reps you've gotten in, and in order to prepare to like to make a group, and then once you're there, that's like another level of amount of time spent with your instrument. Just because the drum corps schedule is, probably in like December and January is when you'd like audition for a group, and then groups will usually host like a weekend audition each month. and then in January you probably know if you made the group, and then they'll host like weekend rehearsals, one weekend a month until the summer starts, and then once the summer starts, you move in with the group around Memorial Day, and then you spend 3 or 4 weeks doing all day rehearsals, which are yeah about 12 hours a day of rehearsing, and then you go on tour for another about 6 weeks, and then that is also all day either rehearsing or rehearsing half the day, and then going to a competition that evening. So yeah, it definitely is like intense on a level that a lot of people just get like culture shock. Even like people who even myself, it's like your first year of doing drum corps. I had a friend who, if I'm allowed to swear, I had a friend who called your first year of drum corps getting your shit rocked, just because it's that much of a culture shock going from oh, I love drumming, like I drum in my bedroom all the time, and have marching band rehearsals a couple nights a week, to doing it 24/7 for an entire 3 month period. Yeah, so it's a little intense, but yeah, people grow to love it, or more often than not come out the other side having learned a lot and gained a lot of life experience from it.
Of course. So I want to talk about both the personality fit for drum corps and also the sort of technical fit. But what would you say are some of the major, like if someone's trying to decide if this is a path that's right for them, like what are some of the major personality traits that it selects for? And what do you think you had about you and your personality that made it such a good fit for you?
Mhm. It definitely requires a level of dedication and passion. Like if like that's something that's just like hard to get around, or it's like probably unlikely that you would just spend that much time on your instrument or like getting to that level if you didn't love it to start. So that's probably the first thing. Um, and then other things that people maybe don't realize. Well, one is like physical fitness. So the more like you're willing to either like interested in being physically fit, or like willing to get fit in order to do this thing, because in addition to the playing for that many hours, you're also wearing a 20, 30, 40 pound drum for all those hours and running around on a football field. um, so that's one aspect of it. And then another thing I would say is being able to be a good teammate. That's something that definitely drum corps has taught me, is like the sum of the parts are great, or wait, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Right? Because you have to do it at the same time as everyone else. You have to play in unison with everyone else and march in unison with everyone else, and that's what makes it kind of magical, is when everyone does it at the same time. Um, Whereas if a bunch of people ran out and like did their marching band show one after the other, that wouldn't be quite as fun. So yeah, those are some of the personality traits I think that either are selected for, or like you kind of cultivate those as you go. And for some people, like drum corps is like a reality check for them of like leaving their ego at the door, or building up those personality traits that otherwise they might not have an experience quite like that, where they get to do that.
Yeah. Another one that occurs to me is the ability to memorize things quickly, the ability to follow directions and adapt quickly, and probably some like dance ability or physical coordination, because just from the little I did marching in high school and college, and then watching what the drum corps do, like it's hard enough thinking about like nested tuplets and playing them clean when you're sitting in a drum kit, but doing it when you're like taking a diagonal step backward and like keeping an eye over your shoulder through your peripheral vision, making sure you're exactly in line. So in the auditions, would you ever see an effect where technically good players with good chops would nonetheless wash out because they would panic or like not be able to retain things or stuff like that?
Oh yeah, all the time. That's definitely a difficult part of kind of the gig, is like lots of music is being learned, right? Like a drum corps show is about 12 minutes long, and then lots of changes happen throughout the season as as you get like on the road doing competitions, and instructors are kind of getting feedback from judges about what they want to see more of or see differently. So that part is something that would be kind of tested at auditions. And I know like probably every audition that I went to for drum corps or an indoor group, there was stuff taught by rote there, and things that you had to just like yeah learn really quickly and then try to perform and like execute at a really high level. And I can definitely say also like the coordination with the marching is something that throws a lot of people off, and definitely a lot of people who are otherwise really really skilled percussionists, like it's just like that level of coordination of being able to play like ram a bunch of notes while also doing these really really specific marching moves or dance moves, that gets a lot of people as well.
Do you do you coach or teach people, or have you coached or teach people who are interested in marching?
Yeah, so I give private lessons, and I teach at a high school and a college marching band. Those are my main gigs right now. I also got to teach at Blue Devils for a couple years after I aged out. Um, and yeah, so yeah, I'm glad that I still get to be involved and help uh, the next generation, who people who want to either make drum corps, or even if it's just like making their high school drum line, or making snare drum on their high school drum line. Yeah, I find a lot of gratification just from helping students to further along on their journey.
That's awesome. The difference teaching students who are motivated and dedicated and directing themselves toward a goal is night and day, isn't it? Because I had sort of two periods of teaching in my life. One when I first got out of music school when I was trying to make ends meet, where I did the mini mall storefront, basically glorified babysitting kids while their parents are across the street at the Stop and Shop. And recently, I've been lucky enough to also teach students who are like motivated. And yeah, if anyone's listening thinking they don't like teaching, just maybe they haven't met the right level of motivation as students yet. I'll just throw that in. But this may be redundant. This may be slightly redundant, but I want to ask it from a different angle, which is like when you look at your students, are there any sort of secret secret characteristics you notice that you have a spidey sense are like good predictors? They're going to be good drum corps people.
Mm, that's a really good question. I feel like technically there are telling things of like um, for beginners, I would say like kids who can understand how to use the rebound of the drum more quickly, like that is kind of precipitous to learning a lot more different skills more quickly. So I think once a kid like and I think a lot a lot of drumline instructors will focus on just rebound strokes, like legato strokes, to start for a long time, because it's so critical to like playing fast things, playing all your different kind of rudimental phrases on a marching drum, which marching drums are like kind of like a lot higher tension than a drum set. So that's yeah, being able to navigate and manipulate the rebound is super super critical. That's one thing that I would say is like a good predictor, is how fast kids can start to access the rebound. As far as personality goes, just kind of the things that you and I that we just talked about, like all those listed things of being adaptable, being able to learn quickly, being having dedication, like spending lots of time on their instrument, things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to ask from the perspective of a drum kit player. So, of course, it's a pretty specific type of chops, but I do think like people who've done drum corps have the advantage of having hands that have had to execute at kind of the highest level. So when you look across the vast swaths of drum kit players who haven't had drum corps experience, what are some things that stand out to you in terms of maybe common deficiencies in hand technique that drum corps would have fixed?
Mm. That's hard for me to answer because I'm still on my drum kit journey for sure. Like and that's something I'm excited to talk with you about, or like ask you, is kind of about your ethos for your channel. But we can get into that in a second. But um, yeah, I can say like it just drum corps. If anything, it just does force you to learn all your rudimental patterns. And not that each rudiment is necessarily so like different from the others. Like I've heard, people will say like, oh, everything is just like a flam, a diddle, or a or a single stroke, and like you just need to combine those. And that's true. But yeah, learning rudimental based stuff, whether it's in like a marching band setting, an indoor drumline setting, or a drum corps setting, it has forced you to like work through all those patterns and kind of figure out the coordination, at least of your hands, and then at least of your hands to like doing quarter notes with your feet. So um, that's one thing I think like drum corps people actually have trouble with switching to drum set is like the foot coordination of now you're playing these syncopated patterns, these like ostinatos with your feet as well as your hands. So that's one thing I can say for sure. Like getting that coordination up to speed has been difficult for me. Is like, okay, like are my feet as clean as my hands right now, and are all four limbs of mine clean with each other? And a lot of times it was like, no, not quite. Like keep working on it.
Interesting. Well, I have one more kind of drum corps specific question before maybe we chat about drum kit a little more. And that's drum kit players obviously have their heroes, whether it's Buddy Rich or Neil Peart, Tony Williams, Stuart Copeland. Is there an equivalent to that in drum corps? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, I would say so for sure. I think drum corps, especially like in the YouTube era, kind of blew up through people consuming the content on YouTube, seeing like, different drum lines, different groups, or even seeing like individuals. So like Scott Johnson comes to mind for me, someone who had a lot of videos out there, a lot of media, and did a lot for publicizing drum corps. So Scott Johnson was one person. Like Keelan Tobia, he was another snare drummer for the Blue Devils who was posting a lot on YouTube. Who I just would like eat up his videos and try to I just wanted to be like him. Yeah, so I think like there's like any number of people you could find on YouTube or now Instagram or TikTok that are making drum corps type content that gets kids excited, hopefully, about learning that kind of style. Yeah, so I'd say that's kind of like the analogous thing for drum corps.
So it seems like social media is more of an unequivocal net positive when it comes to drum corps than like drum kit writ large. Because I know I talk to a lot of people and there's a lot of equivocation about whether it's good or it's bad on net for drum
Mm,
kit. But it sounds like it's
mm.
more of a universal good for drum corps.
Maybe, yeah. I just listened to your interview with Thomas Pridgen uh, last, which yeah, I'm honored to get to go after him. But yeah, hearing all of his thoughts about yeah, like back in the day, maybe drum kit players getting compensated better for like just getting on records or something like that versus nowadays. I would say overall it's been a net positive just for that, yeah, the ability to publicize and get kids excited about marching band. Um,
Mm.
yeah, hard to say without writing a thesis about the social ills of social media in general. But yeah, it's definitely connected a lot of people in the drum corps world.
Interesting. Yeah, well, I have a ton more questions, but was there anything you wanted to ask me about?
Well, I think the first thing I want to say is just that your channel helped me to translate a lot of drum corps ideas to drum set, and I think like yeah, just hearing someone say out loud like you need to play clean, like your four limbs need to play clean together. That and also all of the kind of metronome prescriptions that you have. For me, it was just like putting the met on the and trying to play 16th note groove to that. That was like my light bulb moment of like, oh my gosh, I'm much worse at drum set than like playing snare drum. I think it's just like slightly different journeys, and people have different like epiphany moments on each of their journeys or whatever instrument they're playing, of like those moments where they realize like, oh, like I can start to hear like a level deeper of like my time if it's really even, or if it's has all of these errors in it. So that's something that with snare drumming, yeah, probably many years ago, like before I started to make a drum corps, was like when I was starting to be able to hear, like, okay, if I'm playing like a paradiddle diddle sextuplet at like 180 beats per minute, I can still kind of hear the clarity of whether the six notes are evenly spaced or not. But that's something that for like the 16th note groove on the hi-hat while playing some syncopated kick pattern, I did not have that ability to hear it clearly. But yeah, your channel and the idea of like like micro timing, like things just need to be evenly spaced out, and that's a big part of what separates great drummers from intermediate drummers. So thanks for that. That was really helpful.
That's interesting. Yeah, I forget whether I asked you, but I obviously used some like 2018 era Blue Devils videos as a way to illustrate that concept to drum kit players. Because I was like, yeah, and I don't do this anymore, but I was like, here's a mediocre high school marching band, and then here are the Blue Devils, and like, just do the analogous thing to your playing in drum kit.
Yeah, that's and it makes maybe that's why it helped to click for me. I don't remember if it's in this video specifically, but the video that I recommend to people all the time is to stop trying to groove so hard.
Hmm,
'Cause I think a lot of people fall into that trap of like, if it feels good, then it sounds good necessarily. Um, which, not to knock like, feeling good on your instrument, but that having that like lens of trying to hear yourself clearly, like that's how you improve your feel, rather than this like arbitrary or like external thing of like, oh, just embrace this feel outside of yourself. Rather, it's like something that you can produce, and like if the more evenly or like danceable you can produce your rhythm, then that's like going to make it feel good externally to others.
yeah, I almost it's funny because that's a debate I have in the YouTube comments maybe more than any other. Like, and there are even people and teachers I respect a lot who are more sort of feel fundamentalists. I almost feel like it's analogous to religion. Like there's the feel of the gaps, and there's like feel materialism and feel atheism or something. And I think you're nailing it. Where my approach is that I think sure there are probably some aspects of feel that are innate, but I think one big thing that was missing for me and like a lot of people's approaches to it was this idea that our perception isn't one to one with reality. And I don't know if you discovered that. You probably discovered that to some degree learning to play snare drum as well. Where like, hey, this felt amazing. You listen back to the recording, you're like, nope, that's not quantized. And that was my experience with the drum kit as well. And not only that, the fact that I could practice it with a metronome and practice recording myself and actually just reduce the error rate little by little. And it might be that feel is like an aspect of personality and that different people bring different things that we're born with to it. I think that's true too, but I think we want to reduce the lag, the travel between what we're perceiving and the way things actually sound as much as possible. So at least the way we think we're feeling is what we're actually putting out into the world, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I remember reading once that like, as you get older, or as you maybe like any kind of skill you're trying to build, your taste for it kind of matures faster than your actual ability on it, and so that's part of why like, your perception changes of how you're playing. And so, there's probably a point for a lot of intermediate players where their taste or their perception starts to get better, but they just physically can't do it, and then it's like, ah, man, this feels bad, or like I suck, like what's wrong with me? And it's just that you need to like continue to put in the time to get your ability up to speed, like your physical capacity up to that same speed. So yeah, that what you said made me think of that. And also, yeah, like I think of like Dave Grohl, like how he it's like, or like stories are that he never ever practiced to a metronome except for like, and then they played like one song off of Nevermind to a click, and then he was able to do it perfectly. And like other than that, his feel is great. Um, and then people will take that and say, okay, therefore you either have it or you don't. But it's been as one of the people who feels like they don't have it, it's been really enlightening and heartening to hear your approach. And I think also like Benny Greb talks about it a lot too, of like feeling like at one point I did not have the feel, and then it is something that you can like cultivate through practice, through metronome work, through lots of playing and like coordination practice, and trying to hear the evenness of your rhythms.
Yeah, drum kit's a trip too. Tell me if this resonates, because I think maybe coming from the drum corps world, where everything is quantized and kind of digitized in terms of there's a controlled ghost note stick height, there's a controlled accent stick height, and it's pretty precise. Like if you're doing a rim shot, it's exactly this distance above the drum because everyone in the snare line needs to be exactly the same. To drum kit where it's more contradictory, where it needs to feel analog, it needs to feel human, but it still needs to be precise. But which of these 100 elements that go into a rock beat are supposed to be precise, and which of them are supposed to have a little bit of lag or wabi sabi? And when I see my students working through that sort of thing, I feel like, so you mentioned the sort of taste gap being a big challenge for intermediates, but I feel like another one is, yeah, just knowing which which details it's cool to fudge, and that sounds cool and human, and which details need to be precise. Does that resonate at all? Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, I think so. That's another thing that I think I like discovered more as I was on my drum set journey, was like, yeah, starting with, okay, just because it feels good doesn't necessarily mean it sounds good or that it's going to feel good to someone else. Um, and I think you've made this analogy too of like, on Miles Davis Bitches Brew, like I forget the guitarist, but he told him to play like he didn't know how to play the guitar.
It's John McLaughlin, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, must have been, and yeah, that the idea that experts know how to make things sound like messy or like wrong a little bit in a tasteful way, more than like an intermediate or a beginner player can. And there are like specific things that specific like rhythmic errors, if you want to call them, that just sound immature compared to like an expert doing it. And then when they like elongate a phrase or shorten a phrase, they know how to do it in like such a tasteful or like a tasteful way, or like a way that feels really good. I don't know if I can like name any of those specific exact things, but I think for like rudimental drummers, a big thing of it is just like, yeah, the unevenness of rhythms, and like rushing space, like rushing to the end of a phrase. But yeah, but I think it's one of those things that it really just takes like going on that whole journey to figure out all those things, to figure out like, this doesn't sound good when this mistake happens, but then when this mistake happens, sometimes that feels really good.
Yeah, I like that we're getting into kind of emergent truths that wouldn't be obvious to someone just from a 10,000 foot view. And I think that every kind of area of expertise, every area where people put in years to study something probably has that stuff, whether you're talking about studying law or being a doctor or becoming an astronaut, because what we're doing is just as cool as that, right? Us drummers. But in all seriousness, I think that one thing that I feel like is a really good analogy is accents with language. So it's like, um, if you or I were to try to do like a fake Australian accent or something like that, like you could you could kind of get the most of the contours, right? But then you go to Australia and try to fool someone who lives there. It's not going to pass muster because there are 1,000 little subtleties in the way you pronounce words that aggregate to produce that accent. And I think that's the same kind of thing with kind of any art form, whether you're talking about drum corps uh, or the drum kit. I also had a question about rebound because one thing I'm working through with a lot of my students is the Gordy Knudsen approach to push pull, and just thinking about how there are a few different schools to rebound when it comes to holding the sticks, and like they all kind of interface with the laws of physics a little bit differently. But obviously, the head tension on drum kit is lower. Um, and I'm not necessarily sure that when that necessitates, but I'm curious from your perspective, like coming from being a drum corps snare drummer, what did you feel like you had to adapt mechanically to feel comfortable using rebound on a drum kit?
Mhm. Is the person you named who talks about the push pull thing? Is that the person who kind of advocated for holding the stick more uh, like down the middle of your palm?
Yeah, the Murray Spivak. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's I can say like that was interesting to me because that is not typical in drum corps as much.
Mhm.
There's maybe like one or two schools of thought that are a little more like that, but in general, it's definitely more like as much in the fingers as you can get it. Just like you have as much contact and like control as possible for manipulating. I think mechanically, like the difference because of the difference in type of and because of the difference in the amount of rebound from marching drums to drum set for me was like the closeness of the hand. So for drum corps stuff and for rudimental drumming, a lot of times I'll talk about like front fulcrum and how that's kind of where you're like primarily engaged, and then your back fingers are kind of reacting to the stick, and how they react to the stick can determine how much rebound you're getting. So if you have a closer grip, right, you're probably gonna like the second note. I'll like I'll like show students if you were like hitting the drum in slow mo, like you hit the drum, the force of the drum pushes the stick back up, and then it's gonna tug on your back fingers. And so, however like resistant you are with your back fingers is going to determine when like the next note comes in. If you're playing a double stroke or just like a bunch of rebound strokes, that kind of thing. And then that also can determine like the heights that you're playing at is like if you're trying to play an accent and then a tap afterwards, that is dependent upon like how strong you are in the back of your hand
Mhm.
for getting the height of your second note. Um, yeah, so I think I've had to just like close my hand off a lot more because there's a lot less rebound accessible, and so like times where if I'm playing on a drum or on like on a snare drum and I could just like rebound forever and like keep my hand open, like I'm not gonna get the same amount of rebound or like as good of a sound from a drum set snare. Um, so yeah, I think like closing my grip off and like using more of my bigger muscle groups has been one thing, and maybe that's similar to like I remember Nate Wood talking about the Tony Williams video where he talks about using your back fulcrum more, which I don't know if that's exact. Like when I've also watched that Tony Williams video, and when he says it, I don't know if he is perfectly like like zero space in the back of the hand, but I think it's more that it's like there's a lot more control as far as how much space there is in the back of the hand, and that is like maybe making you think or be really intentional with how much of like your wrist turn or bigger muscle groups you're using.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's what that made me think of.
It's interesting. I'm thinking about like how both techniques evolved, and it seems like it seems to me that there are two things present in the kind of drum corps technique. So one thing I think is pretty obvious, and the other is conjecture. So the obvious thing is that because the rebound of the marching drums is so much higher, the primary objective becomes minimizing the bounce. So let's say you're operating at like 40% efficiency to like 5% efficiency in terms of harnessing that energy of the stick. So in other words, like you hit the drum with a full stroke, a ton of energy is coming back at you. So actually you want to diffuse a lot of it. And depending on what volume the next stroke is going to be, you either diffuse 95% of it or like 50% of it. Whereas with drum kit, because the rebound's lower, sure, there's a lot you can do with wrist tap strokes, right? As you say, larger muscle groups. But at the same time, there there's also a necessity to operate at a much higher efficiency. So I think what people like Murray Spivak and Gordy Knudsen were talking about was, yeah, how do I how do I only waste 3% of the energy that comes out of, so that if I hit a floor tom, I can still almost get a full rebound out of that. So we're pulling more rebound out of the drum to play with. And I think one player who is really fun for me to watch is Matt Garska. I'm not sure if you're a fan of his. I think everyone
Of
probably
course,
is. But
everyone
when you
is
watch
too.
his hands, like it looks like the back fingers are perfectly in contact with the sticks the whole time, and it's just like like amazing efficiency management. Like his fingers look like a ballerina, if that's possible. Um, but the other thing that occurs to me in terms of like why is why isn't there a back fulcrum, or why isn't there a Spivak fulcrum in drum corps is maybe there's also an imperative to make something standardizable. So you want fewer moving parts so that you can coach it down a line, and it's pretty easy to like codify in an algorithm. It's like you hold it this way, these fingers do this. Whereas like Tony Williams, there are like so many layers of subtlety and so many different axes that if you were to try to get everyone in a drum line to do that, it would probably waste a lot of time. I'm curious what you think about that conspiracy theory.
No, I think that's totally correct. I think like many drumline people would agree with that as like a general principle of like the fewer variables the better as far as hand technique goes. Yeah, the more unified it is, or the easier it is to teach everyone to do the same thing, the more likely you're going to get the same sound at the same time. Yeah, kind of producing the same timbre from the drums, which is kind of like for drumline, that's the goal. Which is I kind of go back and forth as to like whether that's the goal for drum set. Like I feel like a lot of jazz play or like someone like Brian Blade, I feel like he gets like a million different sounds from a four-piece drum kit, and it's like so awesome to listen to. It's like it sounds so rich. But then I also hear drum set players talking about consistency and like and Brian Blade, I'm like he could get a consistent, perfect sound from each drum every single time he played on it
Exactly.
if he wanted.
Yeah.
Um, and then I remember, I think like Dan Weiss, right? Like he's like a person that's like kind of advocates for like being really precise with like your playing zone, like just like playing the center of the head every single time.
Greg Hutchinson too.
Um, so yeah, I guess and maybe like different situations. There's like different goals. If you're playing, like a pop gig, then or yeah, pop gig in a stadium, you probably want to play your backbeat the exact same every single time. Like play the kick drum the same touch every single time. And so yeah, I'd say that's something that is because that is very clearly the goal, like explicitly the goal in drumline is to play as perfectly the same every single time as possible, and to play as similar to a group of other people as similar as possible. That is like part of that unifying or making the technique simpler rather than more layered, more complicated.
Yeah, it's funny because I think you're right. I think you have those two imperatives in drumline. Like one is play consistently with yourself so that you can reproduce the same sound every time you hit the drum. The other that doesn't exist in drum set as much is get the same sound and the same visual as 10 other people in a line with you. And in terms of drum kit, I think Brian Blade is a great example because in this kind of modern drumming idiom, post like really high fidelity recording equipment and drum machines that have caused everybody's ears to hear things more quantized, so that's bled into the way drummers play. I think, and the way I teach at least is that in that modern style, it is important to be able to get the same sound every time you hit a rim shot if you want it. And then you can introduce more wabi sabi if you want, right? Like Dave Weckl. But that's consistency to yourself, right? Like I don't think there are any great drummers who would tell you you need to get the same sound on your snare drum that I get when I hit mine. So
Right.
that's a difference. Well, I'm curious about when like what fires you up when you're approaching drum kit these days? Like what players are you listening to? What type of stuff are you working on?
Mm. Before I answer that,
Oh,
I was
sure,
thinking
sure.
of two mechanical things, like based on the last question, and the first one was like the like drumline kind of like trying to manipulate to use less rebound versus drum set trying to access rebound efficiently. I think uh, drumline drumline, we definitely start with that. Like you want to have as much access to rebound as possible. And so I think with a lot of beginner students, it is like the same thing with what you might be describing with drum set students is like sometimes they're just too tight in the grip and they can't access the rebound completely. And so that's gonna like make it really hard to play fast roll phrases or fast legato single strokes. So we definitely want that to start, but then I think maybe from there it's like learning to manipulate to do less to be able to like like how efficiently can you go from like forte to piano in like a microsecond, those kinds of things. And then the second thing I was thinking of was with what you said about Matt Garska, and like his finger control on the stick. I think that is maybe similar to drum corps, and he's someone I would also be interested to like hear his takes on all of this too. But like the I think in drum corps, people will talk about like you want contact on the stick, but not always. You don't always want pressure on the stick. So I think that that's something where like you should hopefully see like their fingers touching the stick all the time, but maybe the stick isn't like against their palm. So that's something where if I'm out here, I'm like able to access like more rebound than if I'm kind of feeling like I'm having to squeeze the stick into my palm. But that is better than like the maybe like you're like starting to lack control the more that your fingers are off the stick like that.
Yeah.
So those are just like mechanical things I was thinking of right now.
All I'll say is that I agree with you there. I think like um, I strive to. I think I call it like being in phase. So it's like if you're bouncing on a trampoline and someone steals your bounce, like that's out of phase, or like hitting a golf
Mm,
ball or a bat like off the sweet spot, or something
mm,
like that.
mm.
So it's like with the ride cymbal, with double strokes, whatever. It's like you're you're right. It may be farther out in your fingers or closer to your palm, depending on speed, depending on rebound, depending on dynamics. Um,
Right.
but same thing, like I feel like if somebody's got their fingers way off the stick, like unless they're going for an effect, like if that's their
Mm,
usual way of playing, then probably they're gonna, you need to exert a ton of tension between the thumb and the index finger, and there are a bunch of other issues. So yeah, you want the fingers sharing the job. Um, but yeah, uh, I'm also interested in what you're checking out when it comes to drum kit and like yeah, players, exercises, what's firing you up these days.
yeah. I'm still doing. I'm like maybe it's just because I'm still on that journey. I'm still like doing so much just coordination and doing it with different metronome placements and just trying to hear as clearly like my own playing as possible. It's like definitely not yeah. It's definitely it doesn't come to me as easy as the snare drum thing. Maybe just because I've been doing that a lot longer. Maybe also because like snare drum like rudimental practice is usually like more staccato. I feel when you're playing like on the ride or if you're crashing in between a bunch of hits too, that like creates so much more wash where some of your other notes can kind of get lost as to whether they're perfectly in the parking spot or if they're kind of wobbling around a little bit.
Hmm.
So that's like my practice, and I feel like I'm getting better and like able to play more clean and to kind of reproduce that for different styles for different gigs I'm playing. But yeah, players, there's like so many, too many to name. Matt Garska, Brian Blade, Marcus Gilmore. Um, I'm working on transcribing that Marcus Gilmore video where he's doing the five lit ostinato the whole time. I don't know if you know that one just based on that description, but
I think I do. Is that the like clinic in Columbia or whatever?
yes,
Something like
yeah,
that,
I think
right?
so.
From like a decade
Hmm.
ago. Yeah. Pum, pum, pum,
Yeah,
and you're just soloing
mhm,
over that. Yeah.
yeah. So stuff like that gets me so excited, so pumped up. Mark Juliana, um, Nate Wood, a bunch of drummers that you have interviewed. Yeah, like it was really cool seeing Annika and Thomas Pridgeon interviewed recently. Just like legends, total legends. Um, yeah, it's like there's so many people that are just like inspiring to watch, and yeah, and like lessons from YouTube too. So like your stuff, and I started watching like the JP Bouvet videos on Minel, and like that's just like giving like a new lens, more ideas for like all the linear playing and stuff. Um, yeah.
That's great. All right. Last question before I let you go. Um, Globally in your life with music, like what are you working towards now? Like what's your what's your project that you're most fired up about? Like, what's your latest shit?
Mm. Well, my band, Droll, is putting out a record this month. So that's
Awesome.
a thing we're looking forward to. That's not, not something that is like a playing thing recently, but something we've been just working towards for a long time. So looking forward to that and playing a festival this month and album release show next month. Yeah, playing gigs around town in a couple different projects. And then yeah, teaching lots of students for mostly rudimental stuff that I'm teaching. Yeah, and I'm just trying to get better at teaching too all the time. Of like taking feedback or yeah, just learning from how to teach, learning from great teachers, and how to like best communicate with different students. Trying to yeah meet students where they're at, um, and then yeah, playing stuff. Just trying to still get clean at the drum set.
Same. Every day. Well, where would you send people who wanted to check out what you've got going on? Like, if people want to go to one spot to see like the latest for Brandon, where would you send them?
Yeah, I would just say Instagram, Brandon Olander. That's where I'll post all my stuff. Yeah, unfortunately uh, one of the social media addicts, or on social media as much as anyone else my age. So, but yeah, that's where you can find. I'm giving lessons, like anything from like one-off to regular, and then also yeah, like gigs I'm playing or music I'm putting out.
Sweet. Well, we'll link that when we publish the podcast. Yeah, glad we were able to link. Super, super interesting chat. Great to
Mhm.
pick your brain. Anything else you want to discuss or leave our audience with before we sign off?
Hmm. Yeah, good. No, I don't know. Yeah, no, it was fun to talk about all that stuff. I definitely was excited to draw that connection from the drum corps to the drum set stuff. I was thinking too, like I have my drum right here. I was thinking maybe I should have been like demonstrating, or it'd be interesting to like have a similar discussion, but like with sticks and a pad to like be able to be like, oh, like yeah, feeling like back fulcrum here, front fulcrum here, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I dig that as a concept. And occasionally like I'll think of ideas for like my educational videos for YouTube, and then I'll want to like hop on Zoom for like 5 minutes with a former podcast guest just like to like get their take. So
Mhm.
yeah, let's dog ear that one. That might make an interesting future mini convo.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, I'd be into that for sure.
Fantastic. Well, it's been great. Really appreciate your time, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I appreciate. Yeah, it's good. It's good to make your acquaintance after. Yeah, I feel like I've gained a lot from your videos over the years. So thanks so much for all that you're doing.
You're too kind. Well, I definitely enjoyed me a lot of Blue Devils marching videos myself, so the feeling's mutual.
Yeah,
Anyway, great speaking to you. Have a great rest of your day.
awesome. Yeah, yeah. You too. See ya.